Hello everyone, this is the 9th video in my Middle-earth collectible card game strategy series. This one will be about the constructing of one-ring decks. One-ring decks, even if you don't intend to play them, you probably should know a little bit about how they tend to function, if only that if your opponent has one, you can have some idea of what you're likely to be in for. In the broadest conceptual sense, they aren't that different from points decks. You still want to cycle your cards as quickly as you can. You still want to move about with taking as little risk as possible. You still want to avoid your characters getting killed, wounded, corrupted. You still want to use your hazards to slow down your opponents. The biggest difference, I would say, is that while regular points decks tend to have a high degree of interoperability, it doesn't really matter if I got 10 points from factions and 5 points from items, or 10 points from items and 5 points from factions at the end of the day. With the One Ring deck, we have a very specific checklist, and the items on it must be completed in order. In that order, the first thing we need to do is play the One Ring. Now, if you look at the One Ring, you will see that it's a special item, and we can only play it after we play a gold ring item and test it to get the One Ring. So actually the first thing we need to do is play some gold ring items that we can test to produce the One Ring. The precious gold, there are 3 types of hero gold rings. There's precious gold ring, fair gold ring, and beautiful gold ring. They're all similar in the sense they're gold ring type items, so keyed at sites that play rings. They're all worth 1 marshalling point and give 1 corruption point. They're all have no direct use. None of them have any direct use. The only real difference between them is that the probabilities for what they become on tests is different. Since we want One Ring, we are going to go for precious gold rings. They're not unique, so you can and should include 3 in your deck. Now, we need to do a test and get 10 or better. There are several methods to getting towards testing a ring. We can use Gandalf's... Oh, whoops, this is the Fallen Wizard Gandalf. We want Hero Gandalf. Regular Gandalf can tap to test a gold ring. We have Test of Lore, Test of Form, and Wizard's Test. Test of Form can be played by any sage. We just roll straight up. Test of Lore is sage. Again, you roll, but you actually subtract 1. And Wizard's Test lets us roll twice and choose our result. Now, you'll notice that like Test of Form only has a 1 in 6 chance of getting the One Ring. So if you just used 3 tests of form, we're going to ignore Test of Lore. If you just used 3 tests of form, you have a worse than even chance of even finding the One Ring on 3 gold rings, and that's if you found 3, tested them all. Wizard's Test does have better odds, and it is what in fact we will be using for this deck, but it is a spell. So that means you have to get your wizard out, and it will force the wizard to take a corruption check. Even so, it has... I should have looked this up before. It's 1 minus 5 to the 6 squared. 25 divided by 36 is 0.69. So it only has about a 31% chance of working on each individual test. Those still are not great odds. There are, however, ways we can boost those odds. The first is to play the Scroll of Isildur. That's a unique brighter item, which gives us +2 to our tests if we have the scroll in the company when we test it. That would mean we need an 8 or better. Odds of getting 8 or better on 2 rolls are better than 50%. We also could go to the Under Grottos. Now that is a bit more involved because it's an underdeep site, and we want to keep our deck lean, and that probably means that we don't... Oh, it looks like I can't put that in the deck the way this is set up. This is the Undergrottos. Easiest way to get there is to go to Goblin Gate and then go to the Underdeeps. But if we want to move around within the Underdeeps, it's going to be tricky without cards that boost our movement, and we probably don't want to include resources for that. Testing it at the site is also +2. This is cumulative with the scrolls, so if you really want to make sure you want to get your scroll, then go to the Undergrotto, then test a ring or two. I'm also going to include 3 far sites. This is a support resource. We can go to a sage at an information site. We tap the sage in the site to pull an item out of our deck. That would let us get the scroll. When we go for the One Ring itself, we can pull it out of the deck instead of having to wait for it. It gives us more of a chance to get the card. It makes things a bit more free-flowing, and this sort of deck will need that. Once we have the One Ring itself, we then need to get it to Mount Doom in Mordor, which is not the safest place in the world, and play either Gollum's Fate or the Cracks of Doom. Either one of these cards successfully played will win us the game, but they both have their weaknesses. Gollum's Fate requires us to have Gollum, which we might or might not have. And Cracks of Doom gives us a whopping -4 corruption check, which will be very hard, even with... So let's talk about corruption for a second, because that is something that should always be on your mind with the One Ring deck. The ring, once you have it, gives a massive 6 corruption points and an additional +1 to everyone in the bearer's company, including the bearer, him or herself. That effectively means that the list of ring bearers is probably down to 2 people, Frodo and Bilbo, who tie for having +4 to corruption checks, which is the highest in the game. Even so, even with them, Cracks of Doom with no further support gives you a better than even chance of getting corrupted and losing the One Ring in its bearer, which will probably lose you the game. So we will definitely need to have test cards that help with corruption, and we probably want Gollum. Because we have Gollum and probably some hobbits, we are almost certainly locked into stealth strategies for protecting our characters. Hobbits are not warriors, so a lot of the prowess boosting stuff just doesn't work for them, and they have pretty low prowesses. However, every single hobbit is a scout, so we have a variety of cards that we can use to help keep our characters safe. My personal favorites are these 3. Concealment is just very simply, you tap a scout, you cancel the attack. Trickery works against most types of attacks. It does not always work. You have to roll better than 5, which is a pretty good odds, but hardly a certain thing. And its major advantage over concealment is that it does not tap your character. Stealth is actually something you play at the beginning of the turn during your org phase, and prevents your opponent from playing creatures. It's very useful when you want to move around with small parties of hobbits. We also could use Halfling Stealth. This one isn't quite as good. It only cancels a strike rather than an attack, but it doesn't require you to tap or anything. You just play it and it's good to go. Another card that we will be using for support, if I can spell it right, is Halfling Strength. Halfling Strength lets us untap or heal a hobbit in the field, or give us a corruption +4 as needed. Since we're worried about corruption, we might need to untap people in the field or heal in the field, and we're definitely going to be using hobbits, we probably want this. Now, I've demonstrated before that with my my points resource strategies, I don't like straitjacketing things this deeply, because we have to play the rings that we have to have the scroll and or be at the undergrottos when we have the tests and have the One Ring in our hand when we're ready to go. It gets very, very messy, and since you can't control what order you draw your cards in, there are all sorts of ways this can go wrong. The first bit of insurance that I like to take out in ring decks is Favor of the Valor. This lets us shuffle our hand and discard pile back into the play deck, and we draw a new hand of 8 cards. If for whatever reason the critical card in the chain has been discarded or something happened, just went wrong, it gives us another chance to try again. The other thing, though, and thank you, Theo, for kind of teaching me this the rough way in that last game, is I think we should be more proactive in leveraging our sideboard. So there are 2 cards I want to put 3 of in this deck. Longbottom Leaf and Smoke Rings. Both of these will let us move resources from our discard pile Longbottom Leaf just works for the sideboard. Smoke Rings works for both discard pile and the sideboard. And we're going to move all of our quote-unquote later cards into the sideboard. That's the Wizard's Tests. If I can find it. Okay, Golem's Fate and Cracks of Doom go there because we don't want them until we have the One Ring out. The Wizard's Tests go there. We're not bothering with Test of Form. And I'm actually going to include a Fair Gold Ring as chaff. I'll get to that, why I'm doing that a bit later. You can see we already have 24 cards. So I think most of the rest are going to be boosting our Fair the Valor's unique, right? Yeah. And I'll put in Old Friendship for anti-corruption purposes. So the plan basically is, as so far, is we run around with our hobbits. Use Farsight if necessary to pull the right items into our hands. We want to play a Gold Ring or 2 and the Scroll of Isildur. We then want to pull our tests and the One Ring. In fact, we can put the One Ring in the sideboard too. That only just occurred to me now. Because we don't want to risk drawing the One Ring before we have the other cards in place. Which gives me another room for another Old Friendship. I was just struck with another idea, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll add it in later. We use stealth cards to stay safe. We either play the rings directly or we we Farsight them into our hands. We'll want to leave 1 Farsight ready to pull the ring into our hand when we get it in the sideboard. And that's once we have the One Ring, we pull our Cracks of Doom. Let's put in 3 Cracks of Doom, and or Golem's Fate, if we have Golem, and we try to make our way to Mount Doom and destroy the ring. Now, even with this setup, it's still actually a fairly constrained deck. So on the hazard side, we want to have as fast and as free-flowing as we possibly can, because I don't want any hazards to be staying in my hand. I'm going to have resources that are going to need to be clogging up the hand, and so to keep the deck flowing, the hazards have to be as fast as possible. I don't want to keep a hazard in my hand longer than a turn. So, as always, we start with Mouth of Sauron. We'll probably have 3 Rivers and 3 Twilights. And we also want all 9 Nazgul. Nazgul, they're very hard to play as creatures, generally only keyed to dark domains and dark holds, and a few areas that's specific to each Nazgul. But as permanent events, you just drop them down. So they're actually very, very easy to play. You just, draw Nazgul, play Nazgul. Another very nice thing is, at some point we will be going to Mordor. And Mordor is full of dark domains. So, every Nazgul that we have out as a permanent event is one that cannot be played against us as a creature. Whoops, that is the wrong card. That is a minion resource. Indoor. Ren. As an aside, the names for the Nazgul come from the Iron Crown Enterprises old Middle-earth role-playing game. They are not canon if you are a purist, and I am something of the sort of person who cares about those things, so I hate the names. But not so much that I'm going to refrain from using them in my deck. Now, Council of Lorien rules say that we have to have at least 12 creatures in our deck, and that, like these guys, are all, creature or event of some type count as a half. So we've got 5 creatures already, and we definitely don't want any more than 12, because we want this deck to play super, super, super fast. So I'm going to include 3 Cave Drakes and 3 Assassins. These are pretty easy to play. They're strong enough to be a little bit menacing without support, and hopefully we won't give away too many marshalling points. We do need 1 more creature. I'm not 100% sure what I want in here. Something easy to play, not likely to give points to my opponent. Hopefully a little bit annoying, but not, I'm not looking to wipe out parties with this deck. I'm looking to play fast and slow them down for a few turns. Although, if an opponent does give us a chance to play a Nazgul as a creature, I would definitely take it, the opportunity to hit them. No, seriously, I need another creature. Let's do a sellsword between charters. Playable to Borderlands and Shadowhold, so fairly easy to play. I'm going to put in 3 powers built by waiting. That, again, super easy to play, and we can use it to increase the hazard limit. I expect our main party to be 2 hobbits and 1 other character with them, so we'll have a hazard limit of 2. Sometimes other people like to do similar strategies, so the power built by waiting, and I think I'm also going to add Daylum at home, are cards that we can use to increase the hazard limits to just throw more hazards down if we need to. And hey, somebody might have their deck planning to go to Dancing Spire. Which dragon is it? Scatha at home. I'm also thinking of Scatha at home. Yeah, Scatha at home is the one that's -1 to all. Again, because it's a permanent event, we just drop it down. We're never going to go to Gon Meglum. -1 to all influence attempts. You know what? I mean, I do like the thought of knocking out influence attempts, but I think it's going to be better to just do 3 foolish words. That gives someone... Why is it not working? The thought behind both Scatha and the foolish words is we want to be able to slow down our opponents as much as possible without risking giving them points. We also want cards that are easy to just drop down. What is the dragons? These are cards that might prevent our opponent from playing a faction. You know, if we stall them, we stall them. That's great. And we don't want to risk giving them any points. I'm at least considering substituting something out for Call of Home, but I kind of like it as it is. Now, as for characters, with our stealth setup, we're pretty much only protected as much as we have stealth cards, so we want small parties. We will need rangers. We'll need sages for the Farsights. We will want diplomats for the old friendships. So one of the things that struck me, I don't normally like her much as a character, but we could play Galadriel as one, and I'm thinking of her as a starting character along with Sam. We definitely need Sam. And in fact, even though either Bilbo or Frodo is going to be the ring bearer, I would suggest starting with Sam as our first character, because we are going to need rangers, and Sam is the only Hobbit ranger. Frodo and Bilbo are sort of interchangeable. The only difference between them is Bilbo's a sage and Frodo's a diplomat. And hopefully we'll have Galadriel, who is both. So we don't, but Sam is less interchangeable. Also, Galadriel will have enough direct influence to have Sam follow her. The main thing is she's also a scout, so she can play all the stealth cards. I normally don't like Galadriel because I don't like 9 mind to have a character who's hard to keep healthy. But with our low hazard limit and hopefully tons of stealth cards, we should be able to keep her alive. That also leads me into the other thought I had, which is one of the other reasons why I wanted her. So we are going to start with Starglass as one of our 2 starting minor items, and probably a Elf Cloak as the other one. Now, Starglass is good because we used it for the other deck. Cancels undead attacks, can lower prowess of spiders, wolves, or animals. Several of the places that we plan on going to for rings will have undead automatic attacks. We also we need 1 site to play a greater item, the Scroll of Isildur. Dead Marshes is a good one. It's relatively close to Mordor. It has an undead auto attack. And if we're starting with Galadriel and a Starglass, I think we should include the file. Now we'll need to take out a card, and I'm going to remove an old friendship for that. But this card basically upgrades the Starglass. The reason this is good, 1, it removes the corruption point, and the file's just better than the Starglass. Starglass, you need to tap the character. The file, you tap the item to cancel undead attacks. You can use it to help protect yourself in the sorts of nasty areas that Mordor is comprised of. And last but not least, you can use it to boost corruption checks. It also has no corruption points. I don't intend to play it in this deck, but because we're playing a one-ring deck, we have to be very worried about our opponent using a corruption strategy, and this card can wreck us real fast, because chances are you don't want your ring bearer to have any other items. You don't want to give, he's already got 7 corruption points. You don't want to give him even more. If the balance of things is in play, and you have nothing else that the ring bearer is holding, the ring goes up to 13 corruption points, and even Frodo is not going to survive a corruption check like that. We cannot, now a lot of people don't include the balance of things in decks. It's a unique card. It's probably at most sideboard card, so you don't have to worry about it right away. But if we have the file, we can give it to our ring bearer. He will now have a 0 corruption item. Harmless if balance of things isn't played, and if it is played, we double the 0 corruption points of the file. It also can just, boost a corruption check as needed. So I am going to try. But of course, our opponent might have Galadriel as a starting character, so let's have a few backup. Backup characters. I'm going to have Celeborn. He's a sage. I basically mostly want sages and maybe another ranger or two. Emerald's a ranger, right? Yeah, and a scout. These guys are mostly here in case for some reason something happens to Sam. Who else do we have? I want like low mind, ideally, hero rangers. Could do Aragorn. I want guys who are scout, ideally scout rangers, so that they can use the stealth cards too. Yes, I think I will include Strider in case. I'm just thinking for a second. I don't think there are any ring or greater item sites in Arthedain, Cardolan, Rudar, the Shire. No. Oh well. Can't do much about that. And I guess we'll include Gonbury Gone as another backup. In general, though, we do not want to be playing a lot of excess characters. We want them for their job and not much else. Now, I'll include Círdan because I like him. And seriously, if something happens to Galadriel, he's not as good because he's not a scout, but he is strong enough to defend himself, and he can hold Sam, and he can play at least the Sage and Diplomat cards. And I'm going to include an Elven Cloak as well. To provide a bit more stealthiness, being able to cancel a strike in the wilderness as needed can protect us from a lot of stuff. Now, we also need to think about our wizard. Actually, let's just go through all the wizards in turn and see if they're suitable. I never remember if it's P-A-L-L or P-O-L-L, but we want the hero versions of all of them. I'm just going to go through kind of the pluses and minuses of them all as I see it. Okay, okay, it doesn't. Okay, Alatar, pluses. He will, a party with Alatar forces your opponent to draw fewer cards. That slows down your opponent, and we do want to slow our opponent down so we can get the ring in. On the minus side, our main haven is likely to be Lorien, and he's not from Lorien. Ameliorating that somewhat is that Alatar can apparently teleport if he's in a haven, and we can use that to get him to wherever he needs to be. He is also a scout, which means he can use our stealth cards, and he is a sage, which means he can farsight. He, however, is not a diplomat, so he's useless for old friendship. On the other hand, old friendship becomes most important when we are trying to go to Mordor, and generally you don't want to take your wizard into Mordor because it's absurdly dangerous. Gandalf is not a ranger, which can hurt because we are a little bit light on ranger power. He's more resistant to corruption. He can tap to test a gold ring, which is not the ideal way of testing the ring, but it's certainly a decent backup. And like I said, he's more resistant to corruption. He's also playable at any haven, and since Lorien is our hub and he's the only wizard playable at Lorien, we can just drop him down there as needed. He's certainly a good pick, despite the fact that I normally do not like Gandalf very much. Palando lets us keep another card, which will help us keep the combinations going. We definitely don't want to have to discard a critical card when we need one. However, he's not a scout, which means that he can't play any of our major cards. All the others who are scouts, we could conceivably break off into another party if we want to go pick up, say, the scroll or another ring or something. Palando is really, really vulnerable in this deck on his own because he cannot use any of our protection cards, so I think he is out. Radagast is not a sage, so he can't play Farsight. He does have the other skills, though. He's somewhat more resistant to corruption, but his main power, the thing about drawing cards from Wilderness, I don't think is super useful in this deck. Unlike the previous deck where just drawing more cards was pretty much always better, here an uncontrolled draw can actually lead us into problems if we draw cards faster than we can conceivably metabolize them. So I'm going to take Radagast out. I actually am leaning towards Saruman. One, there is nothing in this deck that needs warrior skills, so the fact that Saruman isn't a warrior doesn't hurt us. Two, we actually are going to be using spells, the wizard's tests, and Saruman can just easily pull it into our hand if he needs one. I also think that we can include some other spells in the sideboard to enhance that, especially Vanishment, for more stealth power. There are also, I do have to admit, it also does tickle my fancy a little bit to make Saruman the main wizard of a ring deck that features Galadriel, since in the books Galadriel hated Saruman, and I don't think he is the wizard you would trust with the ring. So I think we'll go with 2 Sarumans and 1 one other thought that occurs to me actually is that Saruman is capable of just popping up in his home site of Isengard. Now it'll be dangerous if he's all on his own, but if we have like some trickeries, does trickery work on wolves? No, it actually doesn't. Oh, that's annoying. Let me think about it. I just want to consider something. What I'm considering is it's a different stealth. I don't tend to think of it as much because it's based on the ranger skill instead of the scout skill. But wolves, spiders, animals are undead, and quite a few of the sites that we are planning on going to do have wolf attacks. And, some people do play, wolves. Now, the undead's a little of a bit of a loss because we plan on using the Starglass. But, might have. Plus, you don't need to tap for many turns and doublings. So I think the trickeries are going to go into the sideboard. And we are going to replace them with a trio of many turns and doublings. Now, I mean, theoretically, the combination might not work. But theoretically, we can just have Saruman pop up in Isengard, play many turns and doublings on the automatic attack, get a ring, and, be on our way while our main party does something else. I'm going to add a couple more resources for the sideboard. These are probably not going to be played, but if the game winds up being a bit slower than expected, they might be useful. Now, these are 2 Greater Horde items, so we'd have to go to a Dragon's Lair for them. On the plus side, with our stealth-based deck, a dragon is just as easy to hide from as anything else. Emerald of the Mariner could help with corruption for the ring bearer, and letting us keep another card is definitely helpful for keeping everything that we need to have. The Wizard's Staff will make Saruman a bit more survivable by boosting his prowess, and we can tap it. Oh, actually, no, that's actually no better than his regular ability. Yeah, we're not going to bother with it. But I'm at least going to put the emerald in the sideboard. It's a low-cost inclusion. For the rest of our sideboard, I think we want more easy-to-play cards. No, that's wrong. We want cards that can mess up someone's deck if they, once we see a bit what they're up to. I'm going to include News of Doom. We don't plan on ever playing any factions, so the fact that News of Doom hits us as hard as it hits them doesn't really mean anything. I'm going to include 3 Calls of Home and 3, what do you call them? 3 Muster Disperses, just in case they plan on leaving not enough general influence uncommitted. I also think we should have a few corruption cards just to kind of keep our opponents honest. So let's add some Lures of the Senses. And Lure of Expedience. And we can always use Ren the Unclean to force corruption checks, although be careful with this because we might lose as much as they do. And if you're playing Ren on, since it's a hazard effect, you'll be playing it on your opponent's turn, which means you won't be able to use any of your resources that boost corruption checks. And I think I'll add in two Sea Serpents to the sideboard, just in case. Actually, I'm going to go with Corsair of Zormambar. They're a bit more flexible, but something to patrol the waters in case our opponent wants to play at the sea. And with that, I think we have a first draft of a deck. I will be looking for someone to playtest this, and that will probably be video number 10. Hope you found this informative and enjoyable. Have a good one.